All right, students. Well, welcome to Chapter 29, Years of Civil Unrest. We are going to talk about civil rights for other groups. I apologize here. I had to move and have to be recording from a separate location from what I normally do, just taking care of, like I said, on Friday, some family things. So hopefully the audio of this all sounds good still. But let's jump right into it. This is going to be a pretty short unit. So this section anyway should only take us maybe 5 to 10 minutes max, okay? So we're going to make this easy for you. All right, so let's just start off here. We're going to be looking at Mexican Americans during the Civil Rights era. And we have a couple different programs that were in place. I'll probably massacre how to say this, but the Baracero program, what that did is allowed up to 100,000 Mexican Americans in the United States each year, and often for work purposes, and then to be able to immigrate into here. And what this does is it starts to increase Hispanic populations, mainly Mexican American populations, among the southern locale of the United States, southern states, areas like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. And this drives and creates a larger Mexican American base that should be representative politically, culturally, and have coincide with greater access to rights like they should have had all along. But again, they're restricted. And a lot of times it's just like what the African American population is suffering down in the deep South. There is discrimination that is being levied against these Mexican Americans in areas in Texas and other southern border states. So they had some restrictions placed upon them from voting to facilities they could use. So there was rampant racial discrimination still going on in the southern areas, even against Mexican Americans. And so often what they had to do is try to find equal political rights. And again, this comes from creating and generating political movements in order to gain those rights. So that's what they start seeking to do and how to improve their overall situation. One of the things, too, that also comes into play is how they do work. Mexican Americans during this time frame have a very diverse past, and with a diverse past, you have different occupations and jobs that they would have. So with the occupations and jobs that we'd be looking at, it would be anything from agricultural work to owning shops and stores, all the way up to and including working in offices. So it wasn't like the Mexican American population was completely on a lower segregated level like you saw in the Deep South. They had a variety of job skills and services that they provided. But what it's most known for in this time frame, in this era, when we're looking at it, is the establishment of agriculture. So the people working in the agricultural industry, they're the ones who are actually suffering the greatest from wage discrimination and racial discrimination. So they're the ones who really start to organize and really change how Mexican American lives are impacted during the Civil Rights era. The big person that you see during this movement is Cesar Chavez. You guys may have noticed if you go in Salt Lake City, there's a Cesar Chavez Boulevard. In multiple areas in California, you'll find that. You'll find it throughout the southwestern part of the United States. He's a very important political organizer for Latin Americans during this era. He's probably one of the best known. In fact, if you were trying to compare him, he would be basically the Mexican equivalent to a Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights era. That is how well in regard that he is held up to. What he does is that he is a son of a farmer who lost pretty much everything in the Great Depression, so he grew up in a farming lifestyle. And because of that, he knew the unique situation that many of these agricultural migrant farmers run into, where they're having to go from large farm to large farm, chasing jobs in order to try to make a living. So what he does is he forms the National Farm Workers, and it's a union, which he does, and he really looks to try to just improve their overall life. They want a better pay, better housing, and also access to education. You have to understand, again, when we're talking about these people, they're migrants. So they follow work. They don't stay in the same set area for very long. They just go where a new job opens up. And often they're at the mercies of going to these farms and having to live often in housing that's provided by the farmer, or they have to rent housing. And if they're getting poor pay, usually they're living in very substandard housing. And if the farmer's providing it too, typically it's also substandard. Their children are often growing up too without access to education. And with that comes poverty, because if you can't be educated, as we've talked about a lot of times, education opens opportunities, and these migrant children are not getting that access. So he really tries to push for that. And with that initial program that we talked about when it ended, that ends access to quick, cheap Mexican labor that used to come up during the migratory season. And now they have to hire Mexican Americans who are firmly established in the United States. So it really forces the farmers' hands to actually have to talk to, work with, and deal with Cesar Chavez and his union. And so he uses protests like Martin Luther King. He didn't believe in violent protests, and often he used boycotts to his advantage. And one of the most famous ones that he had, of course, was like the 1968 grape boycott, where the grape growers were not recognizing his union and also not giving in to any of his demands. And so he created a nationwide boycott for the grape industry, and it actually impacts him quite heavily during this time frame. And so this becomes a very important movement here on the end from what Cesar Chavez has to offer when looking at how he changes and improves the situation for Mexican Americans. He eventually does get his unions recognized. He gets in place numerous communities. He sees the pay rate raise for migratory farmers raise over 70% during this time frame. They get access to better housing, but they also get educational access, which allows people to be able to move their children out of a migratory lifestyle and be able to find professional opportunities. And one of the other things that he really does that helps out too is he gets health care protections like OSHA protections. Wouldn't necessarily say OSHA right now, but that's what the equivalent was, is protect them against pesticides and herbicides and other things that they'd be working in historically that they had been exposed to when working in those types of environments. So all in all, he really helps out and improves the lifestyles of migrant farmers and really improves the station of Mexican Americans in society. One of the things those that you also have finally is how do they gain access to political power? Remember, we talked about them being underrepresented, and also having access denied based upon racial characteristics. They're running into the same types of issues like we talked about with African Americans. So they organize groups, protest groups, organizations, and they start to push for greater access to the ballot box, but they also start to push people to be elected to important positions, either in city, local, or state government positions, and even eventually into national politics, political positions that can really give them access to getting greater access to rights and access to the franchise of being an American. So a lot of things change for not just African Americans, not just for Native Americans, not just for Mexican Americans, and also for women. But this is a very big time for change in American life when we start seeing the true diverse aspects of the United States really start to come together as more groups push out to come out from being basically subjugated for a very long time politically. You start to see this more dynamic rise of American politicians and leaders throughout this time frame during the Civil Rights era. All right, guys, that ends it for this unit right here. I hope you guys did well when you were working on the chapter the other day around Native American rights. I apologize I wasn't able to do a video on it for you, but it's very important. If you didn't read it, make sure you go back and do read it. There's going to be information about it on the test too. So make sure you focus in and get that reading done. All right, guys, I will see you again tomorrow.